Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to my session. My name is Bryce Henderson, and we're going to be discussing the socioeconomic achievement gap, specifically in secondary science today. It's a very wide topic, but we're going to kind of hone in on particular aspects, and we'll talk about some practical ways that hopefully we can all support students for a positive future. So, a brief outline of what we're going to be talking about. First, we'll kind of look at what maybe setting the scene a little bit. What's causing this problem? What does research show about it? Then we'll move into a few causes and effects before discussing some solutions and ultimately what practical steps we as educators can take to both define this problem and also hopefully solve it together. So before we get into it, let's take a look here at just the definition of the problem. When you examine research, you'll see that while there's been many strides made with cultural and social gaps, there still exists massive gaps between various socioeconomic status, or SES, of our richest students and some of our poorest students. And so one would struggle to find a problem as widely researched and discussed as the achievement gap. However, recent research is showing that the socioeconomic status of our students is actually one of the leading factors on negative educational impacts. Traditionally, we would have focused more maybe on social or cultural values, which certainly do impact the achievement gap, but a lot of those have underlying roots in the brain and motivation of our low SES students. Research shows that many low SES students from educational backgrounds that might have been a little bit more lacking typically have lower reading skills, more stress, and more cortisol levels, which helps to block the formation of long-term memory, which is obviously a barrier to education. They're also going to be at greater risk educationally of negative outcomes and also lower academic rank once we get to the secondary level and then beyond. And so in science in particular, this is a fairly alarming issue if our job is to produce students who are future ready, especially those going into STEM fields that we're so interested in. If this continues to grow and this gap widens, then we're essentially dooming our students to a failure of academic inequality. And so by closing this gap and really focusing in on the importance of the socioeconomic achievement gap, we hope that the closing of such a gap could help all educators to guarantee success for all students. So causes and effects, we're going to look kind of first at causes. Many of the issues that we see as secondary educators happen well before students arrive in junior high and high school. So by tying back the achievement gap to formational years and during early childhood, we can see that there are huge differences as students are engaging with and entering into the educational world. Perhaps via at-home learning activities or enrichment activities that might have been provided, or the lack thereof by lower SES families, as well as educational support over the summertime. Many students from high SES backgrounds are going to have things like summer camps or productive kind of investigations, maybe at a zoo or a science lab, whereas many lower SES and working class families just spend a lot of TV time and have a lot of kind of individualized time to pursue whatever they might desire. So in addition to those lack of experiences or positive learning experiences, the higher SES families typically are going to have more ongoing support and educational accountability via maybe an increased focus on homework or on projects, and lower SES and working class families traditionally have more trust of the educator and the teacher to actually provide that support and that educational focus for their child. It's not that they don't value the education, but it's more that they simply just don't have the time to provide the support that a higher SES family might have available. And so as a result of many of these things combining, we see pretty much across the board low SES students performing worse than their high SES peers. We see lagging test scores as well as decreased percentages in the meets and masters if we focus in on the biology STAR test or other science testing, as well as decreased representation in post-secondary STEM fields, whether looking at engineering or architecture or geoscience or several other examples. we traditionally see lower numbers of minorities and lower socioeconomic groups versus your white male fields. So rather than really preparing all of our students and leveling this playing field, essentially, without knowing it, many of us as educators are contributing to this continued cycle of inequality between social and economic classes. And it leads for our students to decreased levels of achievement that really carry on beyond secondary education. And so ultimately, this lack of representation in STEM fields contributes to a workforce in the United States and other countries that's not future ready. It also poses huge risks to political and economic elements where a lack of scientific literacy, which is foundational for all informed citizens, results in a population that doesn't know how to vote well and make decisions that are data-driven rather than emotional for a future outlook. Luckily, though, there are solutions to this huge problem in education. One solution has been suggested to be the offering of what's called CTE, or Career Technical Education courses. You might be familiar with these, as they have been traditionally pushed as more vocational courses, such as like plumbing and electrical work. But now, as we're looking at more courses like robotics or electrical engineering and other opportunities for students to actually get hands-on experience and experience fields that they might have traditionally never interacted with, our minority students or low SES students that lack that background and exposure are starting to get hands-on time and actually see individuals like them being able to be successful, and this effectively bridges gaps between their lack of prior experience and possibly future aspirations for themselves. So by kind of partnering with these types of programs, it really allows diverse student groups to access material that they maybe are not as familiar with or just simply did not know about. Another powerful strategy for helping educators support student success from a variety of backgrounds involves something called teaching academic possible identity. Essentially, this is a metacognitive development technique where you're teaching students how to think differently about their own future. Metacognitive abilities, as we all know, refers to the students thinking about their own thinking, and by teaching ways to break through traditionally stereotypes or perceived lack of ability in scientific areas, it kind of teaches its own self-fulfilling prophecy model where students are envisioning a positive academic successful future, and that naturally translates into planning and steps towards that successful future. So in conclusion, we're going to move in kind of the practical element. What does it actually look like for us as educational professionals to put this into practice? Obviously, the risks are clear. If we, as educational professionals, want to overcome the achievement gap between various socioeconomic groups and shape that positive future, and if we're to hold true to our mission of guaranteeing success for all students, then we have to take steps beyond traditional educational techniques to allow those pathways. If students are to escape this cycle of poverty, if they're to break free of traditions and cultural norms that maybe make them think they're not good enough, then we have to take practical steps to address the achievement gap. The way that we should do this is primarily just by individualizing instruction and by valuing and incorporating diverse student backgrounds. Rather than isolating students or making them feel like they're on their own, we need to partner with them, bring in their own diverse background, and come alongside students to provide the support that they need to bridge the gap between the experience or lack thereof. It really takes all of us in order to make this impact: educational professionals, administrators, curriculum developers, and everyone. A lack of action in this area simply contributes to the growth of more and more division in the world as we know it. So ask yourself, do you want to be a part of the problem, or do you want to contribute and help solve this issue? If you're interested in more information about this or continuing the conversation, I would really encourage you to follow me on Twitter and join that virtual learning network and use the hashtag #ClosingTheGap. A couple of my references here. And thank you so much for coming to my session.